The following footage is from a monthly live stream exclusively for paid subscribers to Alex Newman's Liberty Sentinel Substack. Paid subscribers have the opportunity once a month to join Alex and a special guest on a live stream video call to ask their questions in real time and get real answers. To be able to join the next stream and ask your questions, visit libertysentinel.org to become a paid subscriber and support our work to fight tyranny and preserve freedom for generations to come. Now, please, enjoy this conversation between Alex Newman and G. Edward Griffin.
Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for our first ever subscriber live stream with our first guest will be Ed Griffin. I couldn't think of anybody better than Ed to join us for this. He has been in the freedom fight significantly longer than I have been on this planet. And so the wisdom he has accumulated over that time is just absolutely astounding. For those of you who aren't as familiar with Ed as you should be, he's a legend. He's one of the patriarchs of the modern liberty movement. His book, The Creature from Jekyll Island, which I have a copy behind me, absolutely amazing. It has awakened millions of people around the world and across the United States to the horrors, to the evil that is the Federal Reserve System. So we'll get into the economic issues a little bit. It looks like we are headed into some serious economic trouble. His historic interviews have been seen by tens of millions, maybe more people all over the world. One funny story, and there'll be a big development on this coming around Christmas, is Ed interviewed a Soviet defector. And probably everybody on this call knows what I'm talking about. Truly an incredible interview, Yuri Bezmenov. And from what I understand, about 40 or 50 people bought the film originally, I guess back in the day before online streaming and things. And then somehow it got uploaded onto the internet like 30 years after that, and it has since gone mega viral. Everything that Yuri warned us about has now come to pass or is coming to pass. We seem to be in the final stages of this. So there's going to be a wonderful documentary coming out later this year, starring Ed. It is so powerful. I do believe it's going to be one of those things that no matter how much the establishment tries to squelch it, they will not be able to. It is just that powerful. I've been able to see some of the cuts that the director and the producer are working on. Ed, I don't know if you've seen them, but absolutely incredible. It is so good. It's going to blow people's mind. Ed's been interviewed, of course, all over the place. He was even on Fox News. Glenn Beck had him on there to talk about the book. He's the founder of the Freedom Force International and also Red Pill University. These are two powerhouse organizations in the freedom movement working to protect liberty, not just in the United States, but all over the world. And so, we could talk about Ed's bio for hours and hours. He has done so much, more than, a million regular people. It's just extraordinary how much he's done in his life. But Ed, I want to save some time for you to chat. So thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. Thank you to all of the subscribers who have been faithful supporters. I hope this will be a treat for you. We'll open it up for questions from the audience, maybe about halfway through. If you have questions, folks, just put them in the chat. Andrew, Chief of Operations for Liberty Sentinel Media, is monitoring those questions, and he will compile them, and we'll go through them when the time comes. But Ed, thanks again for joining us. I want to start on the economic front. The Federal Reserve has, since the last economic crisis, 2008, started printing unbelievable amounts of money. I mean, we're talking trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars, and COVID hit, trillions more dollars. And it looks like the chickens are coming home to roost now. We're seeing out of control inflation. We're seeing bond values slashed by as much as 40%. It looks like we're headed into some really tough economic times. What do you make of what's happening on the financial and monetary front, Ed? How concerned should folks be about the money printing, the interest rate hikes, and everything else that we're seeing on the economic front right now?
Well, I guess the best way to start answering that question, because it is a profound one, has many different avenues of meaning to it. But the best way to start is from the tail end. How concerned should people be? And I would say they should be totally concerned, because if it's allowed to happen, which I don't see anything happening in our side of this battle that's going to prevent it from happening, because all the cards are in their hands right now. the bankers and the politicians, and they're still in power. So we can be aware, we can be alarmed, we can be concerned, but it is going to happen. We'll talk a little bit later, perhaps, about what we do about it after it happens to pull out of it if possible. But I don't see any way to stop it from happening because it's gone too far. And besides, it's all part of a master plan, Alex, as you so well know. So when I say people should be totally and very concerned, it's because it's going to change our way of life. It's going to change everything that we do. We think we live in a lot of restraints today, and we're complaining about, oh, we've got these regulations and that regulations, and we have to comply with this, and our freedoms are being stolen. Believe me, this is nothing compared to what is planned by these people who, I guess we just call them the cabal. They're the combination of the power elites in government and in the banking world. Those two worlds have come together, and has kind of epitomized in the Federal Reserve System itself, because most people have no idea what the Federal Reserve System is. And the short answer is, of course, that it's a cartel, but that doesn't cover it all. It is a cartel of the leading banks in the United States with strong ties with the international banks. And that is true. They monopolize the monetary system and all of that. But the thing that's easy to miss is that it's a partnership between the government and the banks. The government legalizes everything the banks wanted to do. The banks set out the plan when they drafted basically the charter of the Federal Reserve System back in 1910 when it was passed into law. So the bankers dreamed it up and they wrote it, and the politicians passed it into law. So basically what the politicians did was legalize a cartel agreement that was created by the banks. So now it has the force and effect of law. So if we don't abide by it, well, there are penalties. We go to jail. And so people think, well, nobody can put you in jail except the government, right? So therefore it must be government. Well, it's not. It's really a cartel, but the politicians went into partnership with the bankers, and they've remained that way ever since. So it's really operating as a single entity. And I think the classic definition of a combination between a private sector and the government is fascism. And that's basically what the classical definition of what we've been building in America for a long, long time. And we're leaving something called this glorious republic of ours. And we started moving into fascism beginning of World War I. And by the time World War II came along, we were full bore, could hardly wait to get into fascism full blown. And so anyway, all of that is a precursor to the analysis of what's happening under this thing called fascism, or the Federal Reserve System. And what it is that money is going to be phased out of existence completely in the form that we're used to it. We're used to money, even though it largely today is digital, because all of our credit card money is digital, and most of our checkbook money is digital. And we don't have it in our hands. We don't have it in our mattress. We don't have it in coffee cans. We don't have it stacked up in the basement or anything like that. It exists not even in the vaults of the banks. It exists as digits in a computer. And so there's nothing behind it. There's nothing solid to worry about. It used to be for every little piece of paper that said it was money, it usually said payable to the bearer on demand, and there was a 1 ounce of something like gold or silver. So you had to warehouse stuff. Money took up space. It couldn't be digital. It had to be physical. And that was a serious restraint on how much of it could be created, because you had to literally dig it out of the ground and melt it down and form it into bullion bars or coins or something. So it took a lot of human effort. And so it was a beautiful arrangement, because the money, which took human effort, was pitted against other goods and services which also take human effort, and the balance was always evenly divided, because human effort on both sides of the equation. But now that they take the human effort outside of one side of it, and they can just create it by raising their hands and voting for it, well, naturally that pile grows a lot faster than the one where you have to dig it out of the ground and spend a lot of sweat and tears to make the stuff. So we had this expansion of the money supply, and it was nothing compared to what we've seen in the last couple of years. Nothing in history has even come close to it. And we have already 2 or 3 years ago had far surpassed the amount of fiat money, meaning it has nothing behind it. It exists only because of the power of government to force people to use it. The amount of fiat money that was created in the past, in excess of something solid behind it, that the ratio between an asset and the digital part of it, or the non-physical part, was horribly high. And every time it reached a certain level, the system supporting it collapsed. It just couldn't support itself, and the people stopped using it, and so the economy collapsed, and the kingdoms fell, and people lost their property and their freedom and their lives, and it was horrible. We've seen those cycles in history, and it's always related indirectly to the collapse of the market system, the money system. Well, I mention that because what we've seen today is probably, I'm going to say, 100 times greater than anything that has ever happened before in history. And before all this started, I was thinking, golly, this thing is going to collapse tomorrow. Back in the 1960s, I was thinking, God, we've already exceeded the historical precedent. So why doesn't it collapse? I was thinking it was going to happen on Thursday. And well, here we are many years later, and I finally woke up to the reality of that. One of the things that allowed us to continue this process further and further and further than any other society in history was because we had somehow we'd been able to keep our military well financed with the fiat system, and we had the strongest, most dangerous military in the world. And if any country refused to, or began to think about refusing to accept US dollars, why suddenly they were declared to be a terrorist organization or something like that, and we had to go in and invade them and destroy their leadership and put our own representatives indirectly in power. So we were able to use the power of the armies, the forces, the threat of the atomic bomb, and chemical warfare, and all that sort of thing, plus a very highly refined CIA, which had refined the art of psychological war, control of information, control of human opinions, what was good and what was bad, and so forth. All of those things had developed over the years to the point now where it's very powerful stuff. But you add to it the military, and even if all the other stuff wasn't there, you had to think twice before not accepting Uncle Sam's dollars. Okay, so now we've got this acceleration far, far beyond anything before. And the question is, well, will Uncle Sam's armies and the threat of horrible weapons of mass destruction, will that still allow the people of the other countries of the world, or force them into a very passive acceptance of the US dollar? And we now know the answer is no, because we've got the rise of the BRICS nations, and China and Russia and other countries are very aggressive now in rejecting the US dollar as the dollar of choice, the international dollar, so to speak. So the wheels are coming off of the cart right now. And my analysis of it is that the most obvious fact of where we're headed, or the view of where we're headed, is perhaps a better way of saying it, is to realize that the cartel, the banking cartel internationally, is no longer trying to keep the money system patched up. It's no longer trying to make it work. It's trying to destroy it. And that's something new, and at least as I see it. They're always trying to keep it going as long as possible, kick the can down the road. Because as long as when I'm in office, as long as I'm alive, I can benefit. I don't care what happens to the grandkids. That's their problem. Well, that's not happening. They're not trying to keep it going. They're trying to destroy it. There's no other excuse for it, because they know that we've reached the end of the line. So I think the strategy is pretty clear. They want to destroy it in such a horrible way, causing so much human suffering and angst and fear and tragedy in our human lives, loss of everything we have, our property, our health, everything. If they can do that, then humankind will be set up with fear and be open-minded to any solutions that are offered to fix it. And the solutions were planned long ago. So in order to clear the way to get the solutions into place is to destroy what's left of the old system. And my analysis is that that's the phase we're in right now. We're nearing the final stages of destroying the old system. It's pretty hard to see it. Around where I live, everybody's driving a nice car. Grocery stores are still loaded with food. You can still go down and get gasoline without a coupon, a permit. You still have your house to live in. It doesn't belong to the government or to the bank. So it's in certain places, large places, it still looks the same, but it's like an empty eggshell. On the outside, it looks the same, but inside all the goodies are rotted out of it. So my analysis then, finally, I get to the answer of your question, Alex, is that the egg is just about empty now, and it's going to crack. And when it cracks, it'll fall open, and everybody say, there's nothing inside it. It's empty. It's all gone. Everything is gone. What do we eat? Where will we live? Where's our health care going to come from? Where do we even buy anything? There's no water coming out of the pipes. Well, we need to go to a FEMA camp so we can get water and food and so forth. Now, how do I get into the next FEMA camp as quickly as possible? I'm thirsty. I'm hungry. Now, I don't think I'm exaggerating that, Alex. I don't think so. I hope I am. But I think that is the epitome of what they're trying to create, is a condition where nobody asks any questions. They'll just passively accept whatever is offered as a solution to our dire circumstances. Now, you talk about a grim analysis. That's about as grim as it gets. Now, if anybody is still listening,
I'm sure they're on the edge of their seats, Ed.
Yeah, they're all heading out the door. But
Yep.
You asked me my opinion, and I'm so sorry to say that is my appraisal of what we're heading into. And as I said earlier, I don't think we can avoid it. Now, we might be able to mitigate it somewhat. We still have time to prepare and do certain things. But unless we change the system, unless we get rid of these people who are still in power, the ones who created the chaos are the same ones who are going to offer the solution to the chaos. As long as that's the same set of people, we don't stand a chance. But we still have enough time, I think, maybe to change those name tags on the desks in Washington, D.C. and elsewhere, so that we could have a real recovery, which would be painful enough, but at least it'll be a real recovery, not a pretended recovery that's really just a transition to total slavery.
Yeah, it does sound like a grim analysis, Ed, but my research and my conclusions are pretty much the same. I mean, that's the direction that these people within the cabal want to take us. They want to so destroy life in the United States that we'll be ready to accept whatever conditions they offer us to return to some sense of normalcy, being able to feed our children again and so on. So in the next few minutes before we open up for questions from the audience, Ed, what would be your advice to folks who are looking at this and who say, yep, looks like that's the direction we're headed? What do we do as individuals? What do we do as families, as households? What do we do as a body politic? What do we do as neighborhoods, communities? I mean, you mentioned preparing. How does one prepare for something like that? What are some useful, constructive things that we could do when we get done here?
Well, there are a lot of people who are experts on that. And if anybody's really interested, I think if they go on the internet, they'll find a lot of good articles written on that and some videos. And it's pretty easy to figure out. You got to have food, all right? So you should have some food stockpiled. You should have something that you could use as a medium of exchange, that is money, other than the money that's going to be destroyed. And those little digital things they'll want to tattoo. They want to tattoo and put on our wrists or something like that. So I won't take a lot of time with that because others have done a grand job of explaining it. But we should have food, we should have water supply. But the most important thing, we need the friends. We need to know our neighbors. We need to know who we can rely on because you can't survive alone in this. You need support. You need people in your group that understand what's happening in the world and not going to fall for all the tricks that are offered to us. And we need specialists in healthcare, specialists in growing food, specialists in communications, all kinds of things. A lot of preparation needs to be done. We need to have skills that we can trade our efforts and our skills for other skills from other people. All of that, it's pretty grim, pretty fundamental, but it's easy to figure out. The most important thing usually is left off the list. And to me, the most important thing is that whatever resources we have, we better allocate as much of them as we possibly can now to protect, or let's say, to revive the system, not just to survive personally, but to bring the system back, to replace those name tags on those desks in Washington. We need to start spending some resources, including our time resources, on becoming influential and regaining control of our system. Because without that, it's just a waiting game. It's just maybe we'll last a little bit longer than everybody else, but we'll never recover our freedom again. If we don't include in our little budget of what we can do in preparation, if we don't include this idea of how to come back, how to rebuild, understand the system that we want, and not just we want these guys gone, we want to know what we want to build. And we have to know the difference between collectivism and individualism, for example. We have to know what that means when we say controlled opposition, when people pretend to be your leader, but in fact, they're not. They're fake opposition. We have to learn all of that. And the people who know these things need to band together and help each other. If we don't do that, well, then I don't know what the point is, because we're just delaying the total destruction of our civilization. But I think if we do those things, Alex, we stand a chance, and that's all we can ask for is a chance, along with effort and willingness and determination. We do stand a chance of turning this around, not without paying a huge price. The price has got to be paid. I think as a society, we're kind of like a drug addict. We've been on the drug for so long. Now, if you cold turkey it, it's probably going to kill you. But you got to get off of it a little bit at a time, probably, and it's going to be painful along the way, but you can do it. And I think that's the attitude we have to take to be realistic.
Yeah, and you've emphasized that for a long time now, Ed. And in fact, that's part of the logo of the Freedom Force is, if you're powerless, you're not really in a position to do anything about these plans that these evildoers have for us. So just one more question before we open up to, there's already a few questions in the chat, and we'll get a few more. But what are some ways, you talk about becoming influential. What does that mean? How does one go about becoming influential, especially in today's world where, we're not even sure whether the elections are legitimate? I think many of them are not. You say run for office. Well, if you're really a threat to the system, are they going to let you win? What are some ways that you recommend for people to gain influence and power so that hopefully we can mitigate some of the damage and hopefully build back from the ashes, assuming that's possible?
Well, it seems daunting as a topic, but it's really quite simple. Our opponents, by that I'm talking about the fascists and the Nazis and the communists, they write books on this stuff. You go and look up the books and they'll tell you how to do it. They've done it. They're doing
Rules for Radicals. That was the first book I read when I went to work for the Leadership Institute. And aside from being dedicated to Lucifer, and aside from advocating immorality, lying, cheating, stealing to gain power, a lot of profound insights in there.
Yeah, they know how to do it. Now, what they're doing, the reason they're doing it is wrong, but they know how to do it. And we've never thought it was necessary for us to pursue that action, which is why we've never done it. Well, the only way we came to power back in a couple of 100 years ago was through a revolutionary war. That's a tough way to do it. There was a lot of dead bodies on the battlefield and a lot of blood spilled. And that's how it all started. But from that point, it was sort of downhill because people didn't understand the things we're talking about now. And gradually, the young people came along and said, freedom, well, what's that? We got freedom here. We don't have to worry about that. We got it. They never realized you had to preserve it because there would be people coming into the system every day, new people coming in from the outside, without realizing that power, as Lord Acton said, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. But they don't realize that power also and money, and the same thing basically, are the magnet that not only corrupts people, but it attracts those who are already corrupted. It's a magnet. And so it was that magnet that we created out of the United States government from the early days when it was just a little thing. It was there to protect our lives and our liberty. And we gradually allowed these newcomers we were attracted to it, the would-be crooks, to make it into something grand. They're going to not only just protect us, but they're going to take care of us. They're going to teach us how to think and take care of our health care and, provide clothing and shelter and food to those that need it. Tell us what schools to go to and what we have to learn. And it went from protecting to controlling. And that just took 200 years, but it happened. Well, next time we do this, we have to be aware that we have to build in certain mechanisms that will absolutely be focused on preventing that from happening. So all of this has to be part of our little group. You can't just say who doesn't like the Democrats, or who doesn't like the Republicans, who doesn't like big government. That's not enough. You've got to understand some of these more profound issues. And so back to the issue that got me moving on it is that it's not enough just to have food in your pantry and a big barrel of water to survive. You've got to think in terms of how you restructure the system, because that's the only thing that's going to work in the long term.
Yeah. Profound insights, Ed. Let's go ahead and start doing some questions here. We've got a few already lined up in the chat. Jim says, great information. Thank you, Ed, Alex, and Andrew. We've got Thomas, who himself is a writer, a very, very astute writer. He's an excellent analyst on communism. He's got a Substack called American Discerner, which I subscribe to. It's very good. And he says, first, I'm honored to be here, Mr. Griffin, the Newman heroes. I'm grateful for your work. It's been very influential. A question for Mr. Griffin. A while back, I saw an interview with you in which you mentioned that Yuri Bezmenov, and we mentioned him at the start here, Yuri Bezmenov finally concluded that the CIA wasn't really interested in taking down the Soviet Union. Wow. And all behind it. And that he moved to Canada and died in disappointment. So Thomas is wondering, could you provide more insight into that? This would seem to verify that what I call the globalist CCP axis has been behind and compromised our deep state, in air quotes, for several decades now. So that's from Tom Wigand. And what do you say, Ed? Do you think that the globalists and the CCP are kind of working together behind the scenes? What's that relationship? And talk a little bit more about Yuri Bezmenov dying in Canada in disappointment upon realizing that the CIA wasn't serious about what everybody thought they were doing, which was trying to protect us from communism.
Yeah, well, let's start with that. I don't really know that he died in Canada in disappointment, but I do know that when I was talking to him here in the States, and that was a couple of years before, he had already learned, because we talked about it, but he had already learned that the FBI and the CIA were not interested in him. They didn't want. He was an embarrassment, because if they acknowledged what he was doing and why he defected from the Soviet Union, because of all of the horrible things that he witnessed and participated in as a high-ranking KGB officer himself, then the FBI or the CIA had to acknowledge that would be a wedge driven between the United States and Russia. You see, that was how they explained it. But a more mature view, I think, is this, that we have to understand that what was in existence in the Soviet Union then was called communism. But at its base, it's called collectivism. It's just one form of collectivism, communism. Fascism is another variant of collectivism. Nazism, another variant of collectivism. Socialism, another variant of collectivism. Underneath all of these totalitarian systems, it's collectivism. We have to start using that word and understanding all of the features of collectivism, because they're present in all of them. Now, the reason I mention that is because at the very time that the FBI and the CIA was rejecting Yuri, they were working for a government which was on a wild, mad dash toward collectivism under a different name. The name they used, it was Americanism. And they could hardly wait, as they still are doing everything they can to change our system to what's in China right now. They want this, a credit system, credit score system, in order for us to be able to buy food. But they call that Americanism because we're doing it in America. And we don't understand, at least I didn't in that particular time when I was talking to Yuri, I didn't understand this underlying philosophy of collectivism deeply enough to realize that, well, Yuri, let's quit talking about communism and just say it's collectivism. And they're trying to build collectivism in America. So why should they be opposed to each other? They believe the same thing. And then later on, I learned that in order for this cabal that's running this show, who runs both sides of this conflict, they need to have a conflict. They need a battle. And so they have a right wing and a left wing, which are merely variants of collectivism, but they fight each other. And then we are given the proud choice of deciding which side do we want to be on. Do we want to be on the right or on the left? Do we want to be a communist or do we want to be a fascist or a Nazi? See, do we want to be a Democrat or do we want to be a Republican? We don't realize that they're both run by the same people, and they do it deliberately because they need conflict between them, so that no matter which side you choose, thinking you're doing the right thing, you're still promoting your own demise. And that, it took me a long time to really focus on that. Yuri didn't understand that, and I didn't understand that at the time. But in retrospect, I see that was really what was going on. So that's what... And I knew that Yuri was terribly discouraged because we talked about that, but he didn't understand why. He just thought it was stupidity. Well, no, it wasn't stupidity, it was brilliance.
Yep. And folks, another plug for that movie that's coming out probably around Christmas time by Malone Pictures. Stars Ed Griffin, stars Yuri Bezmenov. Yours truly is in it as well. Very small group of people were interviewed for this, but the pieces that I have seen are going to connect the dots. I think, especially for my generation, for millennials. Justin, the guy who's making the movie, and I had some conversations. Millennials are like right in the middle of this. You had the older generations that grew up with the ABC, CBS, NBC, kind of following the narrative, and you know, other than Ed and some exceptions, I think a lot of them are still trapped in this idea that, like, well, they wouldn't all lie to us. I mean, there's got to be some truth to what they're saying. And then the younger generations that have just been brainwashed. But so you have this group of Americans who watched that interview that Ed did with Yuri Bezmenov, and things started clicking. Like, so that's what's going on. So folks, that documentary is coming out around Christmas time. It is going to be incredibly profound. Ed, before we leave that question that we got from Thomas, and thank you for that excellent answer. Where do you think the CCP, the Communist Party of China, fits in? I mean, I know you're familiar with the works of Anthony Sutton, the Wall Street and the Bolshevik Revolution. I know you're familiar with, again, May God Forgive Us, where Robert Welch explains the very significant role of, like, the Council on Foreign Relations, the U.S. State Department in bringing Chairman Mao to power. We saw the Rockefellers and the Kissingers, and now the Klaus Schwabs and the George Soros is building up this communist Chinese behemoth. What is the relationship between, say, the globalists in the Western world, the CFR crowd, the Royal Institute for International Affairs crowd, and the mass murdering butchers over in Beijing?
Well, that's a really good question. Their techniques are quite different, but their ideology is the same. They have different strategies for coming to power. And it reminds me of I produced a lecture film some years ago on More Deadly Than War, I think is the title of it. And my goal was to describe the communist strategy for two types of revolution. And it was eye-opening to me as I learned it as a student that I used to think that communism was, violence in the street, taking over a country through violence, revolution in the streets. And then I started to hang out at the Communist Party bookstore and started reading their literature. And my gosh, I thought, well, how naive could I be? Because a lot of that literature had to do with the very detailed analysis of the two kinds of communist revolution. There's the violent and the non-violent, depending on the environment, depending on what nation you're dealing with, or what phase of the revolution you're in, all those kinds of things. And it came gradually to my mind that in countries where the people were ruled by a dictatorship in the beginning, it was a dictatorship. And nobody really thought very much about freedom. That was not in the vocabulary, unless you were part of the royalty or something like that. But that could include a very powerful country, a dictatorship, or a bunch of little banana republics, which are really dictatorships too. So for those kinds of environments, violence in the street was the preferred method. Then there were other countries which had evolved into a parliamentary system, like the United States and the UK and so forth. And wherever people got all wrapped up in political parties, they're going to vote for their dictator or whatever. They vote their leaders into position. Therefore, it's okay because they must represent their point of view. That'd be naive. But anyway, for those people, they have what they call parliamentarian revolutionary strategy and tactics, where you vote yourself into slavery because you are told and you are convinced that it's for your own good, for the greater good of the greater number. So that is what's going on, I think, in answer to your question, even today. It's those two kinds of revolution. And in China right now, I don't think they've really had much of a experience of democracy, or that's a bad word, of representative government, I suppose. So violent revolution works fine in China. But increasingly, those people are being told that somehow they should have a voice in their selection of their leaders, like we believe we have a voice in the selection of our leaders, which is a highly questionable assumption. But anyway, the idea, I guess, let me cut to the chase, is that this ruling cabal really laughs at this whole idea of two different styles, because they create and fund them both. You mentioned that the money comes from Wall Street in many cases, most cases. The big money comes from Wall Street. And they'll finance the communists, they'll finance the Nazis, they'll finance the fascists, they'll finance anything that is a variant of collectivism, because that's what they want. They don't care what flag it carries or what kind of uniform the guy puts on, how many style of ribbons he's got. As long as he's a collectivist, they're all for it. So I think that's it. We have to rise above this sophomoric idea that these two groups that are often seen in conflict against each other really are performing a function, which is to keep the population anesthetized to the fact that they are participating, all right, but they're not participating in choice. They're just participating in the rate of evolution toward totalitarianism.
Yep. Excellent, Ed. And to your point, the book that I referenced about by Stanford historian Anthony Sutton about Wall Street and the Bolshevik Revolution, he did another one called Wall Street and the Rise of Hitler, where he documents how the very same evil financiers who brought the Bolsheviks to power also brought the Nazis to power and financed them. Prescott Bush, Senator Prescott Bush of the Skull and Bones Society, grandpa of George W. Bush, he was actually busted under the Trading with the Enemy Act when he was at Union Bank for helping to finance the Nazis. So it's absolutely incredible. And our next question comes from Christy, and she asks, what was the pivotal moment in your life that awakened you to this big mess, for lack of better words, happening in our country and world?
Well, that's an easy question to answer, and that is there was none. There was no pivotal moment. It was a gradual awareness, growing awareness, a series of steps where I would say, oh my God, I didn't know that. And each time it would get a little louder, oh my God, and it was bigger and bigger. I didn't realize it was that big. And that process, by the way, still goes on. I still am discovering areas of this reality that I was blind to up until that time. But I think probably if there was a point, it was a broad point, and that was my awakening to the reality of money and the banking cartel, and particularly the Federal Reserve System, which was my door into all of that. Because it took me 7 years, Alex, to really gather all that information and index it in my mind and try to put it together. There was no particular pinpoint, aha, that's it. But if you bear with me and call a 7-year project a point of awakening, then I would say that was it.
Fantastic. Let's go to our next question. This one comes from Jim. It says, Mr. Griffin, we are in your debt for your books, lectures, conferences, and leadership for all of these years. Thanks. When you talk about our society being addicted to the wrong things, what is the one thing all of us should give up or stop doing today to help us regain our freedom?
The one thing.
or 2, or even 3.
Well, I'm going to fall back to something that's kind of cliched already. It came to mind one day when I was in Czechoslovakia. We were publishing a new edition of World Without Cancer, one of my books, and the publisher there wanted to bring me over and put on some press conferences. And so I was at a press conference, and there was a group of reporters there, and at the end of it, one of the ladies reporters said, "Mr. Griffin, what is your advice with all of this? What have you learned from all this?" And I just blurted out some things, and I got to thinking afterwards, I said that, didn't I? That's pretty profound. I better remember that. So I'm gonna dump it out here right now. And the three things, well, the first thing was question authority. The second thing is to respect nature. Of course, that applies to cancer and all the health related issues, but also other issues as well. And the third thing was to do what your conscience tells you you have to do, and not be afraid to stand against the majority. Stick to your principles. And that's about it. I mean, that's those broad topics. I thought of one actually this morning. It was funny. I was waking up. I thought, there's a fourth one there. And then I thought, no, it's really a subcategory of the first one. And that is be leery of popular opinion. And I realized it was a subset of the first one because popular opinion is usually created by authority. So I'll go back to my 3 points and leave that one for people to discover.
Yeah, no, that's excellent advice. And of course, our founding generation understood very well the need to question authority, and they did, and they actually resisted the lawless and tyrannical authority of the king. But we unfortunately have so many Americans today who just not interested, more interested in the Kardashians and so on. So our next question, and Jim, who asked that question, is a great supporter of what we're doing. And so we're very grateful to Jim. Our next question comes from Andrew. He's been thinking a lot about this over the last few months here. And he says, reflecting on the upcoming 60th anniversary of the assassination of John F. Kennedy, which of course you lived through, was there a deep state hand at play in the president's murder? What are your thoughts on that, Ed? I know there's all kinds of views out there. What do you think happened to JFK, if you know?
Well, there's so many theories on that, and I have wasted a lot of my youth reading books and stuff on this stuff. And there are a lot of conflicting ideas. So, and I don't consider myself to be an aficionado yet. Maybe another 20 books or so, maybe I'll say, I got the answer. But my opinion at the moment is that it was half deep state and half mob. Now, that's an interesting question in itself, because the mob and the deep state are fused together pretty much like banks and government. I mean, how many times do we know that the CIA or the FBI has deliberately and rather publicly employed the services of some mafiosa people because of their expertise, And of course, we do know that the federal government did import a large number of Nazi scientists after World War II, some of whom were pretty well convicted of genocide and horrendous crimes against humanity, but we brought them in anyway. So it should be no surprise that we wouldn't, work quite well with a couple of mob bosses. And I discovered that the mob had some personal motives, some gripes against JFK, because JFK was, he promised to protect the mob, and if he was, he accepted their support. And Robert Kennedy also was involved in that, and a lot of people believe that's the reason that Robert was killed, is because he went back on his word and he was going against the mob. So all of these theories come up, and they seem very, very logical to me. The only one thing I can say with absolute certainty, and that is that the official narrative is totally false. Having said that, I'm still I'm open to more information.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a hard one, and I suspect the people who did it were partly responsible for the outrageous number of theories floating around there. But to your point about the mob and the deep state working together, that's not a new phenomenon. The CCP works very closely with the triads, and actually, this presidential candidate that was just murdered in Ecuador, Fernando Villavicencio, he was murdered very conveniently right after pointing out that the drug cartels and the mafia in his country and across Latin America was working with the politicians and the governments of Latin America. It seems like that's one of the things that you're just not supposed to talk about. But yeah, 60th anniversary of JFK coming up, and that was a few decades before I arrived on the scene, but I know you were there, Ed. Any lessons to take from that before we go to the next question? I mean, is there anything for Americans to learn? I know they tried to blame conservatives for a while. Any lessons that we should take as we head into the 60th anniversary from that horrific attack?
Well, the only lessons I think, or the only takeaway, as I've already mentioned, question authority, because the authority's view on that is totally corrupt, and be leery of consensus. So those two come together for that issue as well. This is surprising how many issues really suffer from those flaws.
Yep. Our next question comes from Bud, and he says, I saw a video explained if we just start printing money by the Treasury instead of the Federal Reserve, the debt-free money could pay off the debt slowly without creating inflation. So Ed, how do you address that? Should the Treasury just start printing debt-free money instead of the Federal Reserve? And to broaden it a little bit from my perspective, let's address that. But you talked about at the beginning, rebuilding from after whatever terrible times we're headed into. I think it's pretty clear that we're headed into some tough times here. So when it comes to rebuilding, and we're down to less than 10 minutes, but obviously, how do we rebuild in a way where we don't end up in the same problem? What would an ideal monetary system look like? What are some, differences in government approaches or even constitutional strictures that could be put in place so that if and when people do have an opportunity to start from scratch or to build on what used to be, we can do it in a better way?
Well, I see two issues there. The first one is that a good proposal just to have the Treasury issue the money and print the money up? And of course, I think it's rather shallow thinking, because if you really understand the process of inflation, it's not a question of who makes the money and prints it up, whether it's the bankers or the politicians. It's the fact that somebody is doing it and has the legal authority to do it. And it makes no difference whether it's done by the politicians or the bankers. And as I tried to make clear, they're two peas in a pod. They work together. I mean, take a look at the members of the chairman of the Federal Reserve, for example. Sometimes they wind up in government. And
Janet Yellen.
Yeah. And look at the Treasury secretaries. They come from the banking fraternity. So what's this difference about bankers versus politicians? No, they work together, and they are the same people in many cases as they move back and forth through the revolving door. And so I think the same issue is pretty much involved here. We're talking about, it's not a question of who creates money madly and floods the country with trillions and billions and trillions of dollars. It's that it's done at all, and it makes no difference for inflation purposes. Now, the idea that, well, look at all the interest they would save on the national debt. People who say that don't realize that the reality is that they pay very little interest on it as it is. The Federal Reserve Charter, the Act, the Federal Reserve Act, has a specific provision in it that says that any amount of interest that the Federal Reserve System receives from the that the Federal Reserve pays to the federal government in excess of the cost of running the Federal Reserve itself is refunded back to the Federal Reserve. In other words, the government does not pay interest at all, because how do I say this? There's a better way to say this. All the money that the federal government receives in interest, or is supposed to receive in interest, they first deduct from that their expenses of running the Federal Reserve System. Let's use an arbitrary number. Let's say the Federal Reserve System pays the federal government, the federal government pays the Federal Reserve System $1 billion in interest. But the actual cost of running the Federal Reserve itself is $500 million, okay? So the other half is refunded back to the federal government. So what happens is that the federal government is not paying all that interest, only the amount of the operating costs of the Federal Reserve itself, which is a very small amount compared to the interest paid. Most people don't realize that. And anyway, that's a gimmick. It doesn't make any difference because the numbers are so big now that nobody cares about the balance sheet. It's just nobody intends for that interest to ever be repaid. It couldn't be repaid anyway. But anyway, nobody thinks about repaying it. It's a game. It's something people talk about, but there's no way in the world that it'll ever be done or could be done. And if it were, well, if the debt was repaid, let's talk about the debt. If the debt were repaid, then all the money would go out of existence because that's how money comes into existence. It's loaned into existence. So it's a physical impossibility to pay off all debt, whether it's government money or private money and so forth. So there's a lot of problems with it. So let's put that aside for the moment. And let's see, the other half of it was, what would be the better system? Well, this may surprise a lot of people, but I'm not against the banks. I think the banks could and should perform a very important service, and will be a very important service to the economy. And in the beginning, it sort of started out that way. I believe that all money should be backed by something of asset value, some tangible value, an intrinsic value. And immediately people think, well, that would mean gold and silver, wouldn't it? Well, it does. In the traditional monetary system, that's how it starts. But now, when a bank makes a loan to a farmer, and the farmer pledges his ownership, his mortgage on the farm, to the bank as a deposit, as a reinforcement. So in case he doesn't pay the loan back, well, then the bank takes the farm. It's seems like a logical thing to do. If you're going to loan somebody some money, you want some asset in reserve to protect yourself. And so now that money, even though it's created, you might say, out of nothing, it's actually got behind it not gold or silver, but it has the banker's mortgage. It has an asset value behind it. And so the bank has provided the farmer with a convenience on converting his farm into money. Just like the guy that's sitting on a stack of gold coins can convert his gold coins into paper money. He exchanges them, puts them in the bank, and he gets a receipt, a lot of paper bills, or he gets a credit in his checking book. Either way, there's something behind that money. So under those conditions, it's a perfectly logical thing for banks to be able to do that if they want to, and for borrowers to be able to take advantage of it if they want to. It's got to be totally voluntary, of course. It's when it's all demanded by law that you have to use this money and so forth, and that's the interest rate you must pay no higher than that. Once the government gets into it, not the free market anymore. But if the banks were allowed to perform as a free market corporation, doing any other business, whether it's a grocery store, a gas station, or what, they keep their promises, and they maintain an honest ledger of assets and credits and liabilities and so forth, there'd be nothing wrong. It'd be a wonderful thing. It would enable the economy to move forward quite well, not just based on gold and silver, but on other assets as well. And it would be sound money. But they don't do that because they've all lobbied Washington, and they get exemptions from this requirement and exemptions from that requirement. And if that should fail, they're going to be bailed out by the government. All of these artificial additions to the ways in which banks operate, which are not privileges offered to any other business. If any other business were to do any of the things that the banks do legally, the other businesses would be, the leaders of those businesses would be thrown in jail because they would be violating the law. But the banks very wisely send their agents to the Congress, and they get bills passed in Congress which make all these things legal. So that, therefore, when the banks fail, then the taxpayer has to bail them out. They have to by requirement. And because why? Well, they were protected by the federal government, or they were given a special privilege and so forth. So the short answer, Alex, is that if banks were required to operate like the local grocery store and keep honest books and keep its promises, I think that'd be wonderful. But banks have never done that, except for a very short period of history in the hundreds and hundreds of years ago in the Netherlands. It worked pretty well, but then the bankers figured out, well, with fractional reserve banking, we can start lending out money that we told people we would be guarding. They gave us the money, their money. We told them we'll put it in the vault and we'll guard it. And they paid us a fee for it. And we didn't tell them we would be lending it out at interest. It was their money we're lending out. If they had known that, they would have not permitted us to do that, or they would have taken their money out. So that's, you see, the banks get away with doing things that other businesses do not. If that were removed, I think banks would be a very, very healthy thing.
Yeah. Excellent words of wisdom. Ed, we are out of time, but you are the founder of the Freedom Force International. You're the founder of the Red Pill University. You have the Reality Zone bookstore. Where would you like to send people to get on your mailing list, to get involved ahead of the next Red Pill Expo, which I think will be, spring of 2024? Somewhere yet to be determined, but where would you send people to connect with you and get on mailing lists and get involved?
Well, I have several websites, and any one of them will get you on my mailing list if you go and just sign up. All of them have sign up here for a free subscription, and any one of them will get you on my master list. But I think the best place to go for somebody who just wants to peek around and see what we're up to, of course, the only one that we sell anything on is Reality Zone. That's our bookstore. And we just have books and recordings and films there. But all the others have to do with ideas. We have nothing to sell but ideas. And I would say a good place to start would be would be redpilluniversity.org. And from there, you'll see what's going on at Red Pill Expo, which, by the way, we just made a decision this morning. It's going to be in June in Rapid City, Iowa, and let's see, on Father's Day. I decided we'll call it Founding Father's Day.
Excellent.
So that's it. So if you go there and just send us your email, that'll put you on the list for all the future announcements. And then anything relating to Red Pill Expo, Red Pill University, Freedom Force International, Reality Zone, all of these websites. Oh, by the way, our 3 times a week news service called needtoknow.news.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
That's another one. So you see, we got a whole bunch of them there. But sign up for any of them, and you'll be on the list for everything that happens in any of them.
Excellent. Ed Griffin, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Thank you for all that you have done and continue to do and will continue to do for the cause of freedom around the world. We really, really appreciate it, Ed. And to all the folks who joined us tonight, all of our paid subscribers, those who asked questions and those who just listened, we appreciate it a lot. We'll be doing these monthly going forward. For paid subscribers, we'll make it public to everybody after about a week has passed. And so thanks everybody for being on. Thank you again, Ed. And God willing, we shall see you guys again in 1 month. Thanks again, everybody. God bless you all.
Okay. Thank you, Alex. Adios.
Thanks, guys.